people are filing in here. Yeah, hello everyone. Sorry for starting a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties that hopefully we've gotten all squared away. My name is Zach Schalk. I am the Indiana Program Director for Solar United Neighbors. Thank you for joining us today to learn some tips and tricks and helpful training for lobbying your state legislator about renewable energy issues. Real quick before we get going on the presentation by Laura Arnold, who will take over here in a moment, I just want to make sure everybody is aware of the setup we have here on Zoom. So first of all, we'll keep everybody muted, at least during the presentation. We will allow people to open up to ask questions after the presentation is done. But during the presentation, if you have a burning question, feel free to click on the chat pod, which should be available at the bottom of your window. And that will open up the Zoom webinar chat. Make sure in the to line that it's selected all panelists and attendees, so it's not just going to the panelists. And then you can type in your message, your question, your comment, anything that you want to share there. And if it's time sensitive and relevant to the slide that we're on, we'll go ahead and read it live so we can get an answer during the presentation. After the presentation, once we go for general questions, you can raise your hand to let us know that you have a question so we can unmute you, and you'll do that in the participant pod. So click on participants at the bottom and you'll see a little raise hand button that you can click. Other than that, I think we should be good to go. If there are any other questions, again, feel free to drop them into the chat pod. And thank you again for joining us. And on that, I'll hand it over to Laura for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Zach. And sorry for the delay in getting things going. We actually practiced this yesterday, but new issues arose today. I didn't advance that. Okay. Whoops. We have, from what I can tell of the people who have registered, a very broad range of people of backgrounds and talents and understanding about the legislative process. So please do not feel insulted by any of the things that we talk about. And if there are things that you don't understand, please, again, ask a question and this is supposed to be interactive. We'll kind of go from there. The reality in Indiana is, most of you know, and I didn't, somehow it keeps advancing without my clicking it. We don't have a mandatory renewable portfolio standard. We have no clear authority for third-party PPAs. There are no state financial incentives for the most part, except for maybe one. We have a phase out of investor-owned utility net metering to happen no later than July 1st, 2022, which will then go to average locational marginal price times 25% or 125%. But that could happen sooner if the caps are met. And for example, Vectren, we believe, is poised to file something in early 2020. We have Republican control of all statewide offices and supermajorities. Oh no, what did I do? In both the Senate and the House, and we have no state siting authority. What's our potential? Well, we have a strong pro-business climate. State taxes are reasonably low. We have a number of pro-solar mayors and cities. We have lots of potential because we have many aging coal-fired power plants. So the first thing to do in terms of preparing for Renewable Energy Day is to just think for a little bit about what is your situation in terms of how you want to explain it to your legislator. Are you a current solar homeowner? If not, why not? Because you're not a homeowner, you're in an HOA or a historic district. Is somebody else advancing these? I feel like, okay. Or if you ever have other site problems, your interest in participating might be because your place of worship wants to install solar. Perhaps you have a business currently that's in the renewable energy field, and or you are interested in either getting a job or starting a business. I strongly recommend doing a little research about your state legislators before you hit the State House next week. You can go online to the Indiana General Assembly website, see what bills they've introduced in the past, Google them, their names, to see what they are saying. Look on their campaign websites, look at the boundaries of their state legislative districts. Information on their recent campaigns. Did they have an opponent in the primary or the general election? What you may be surprised to find is that many of these legislators do not have opponents. Also, I'm getting weird signals on my computer. You can also research their voting record through VoteSmart, which will give you some generic stuff, or Citizens Action Coalition has done a lot of work in this, and I would strongly urge that you look at their information that they have compiled. What are the energy issues most important to you? Are you in a situation that you're interested in the homeowner association, prohibitions and restrictions on solar? Do you want to restore and expand net metering? Is your issue customer choice with clear authority for third-party leasing and power purchase agreements? Are you interested in community solar, protecting landowner rights, and last, jobs and economic development potential? These are things that you ought to be thinking about how you want to present to your state legislators. So here, how to approach your state legislators. Here is the reality. In the Indiana State Senate, there are 40 Senate Republicans and 10 Senate Democrats. In the House, there are 67 House Republicans and 33 House Democrats. What does that mean? There are supermajorities of Republicans, which means they can conduct business at the Indiana General Assembly without a single Democrat showing up. And that is a particular issue that we need to address when you consider what we're doing. One of the problems that occurred last year was implementation by Speaker Brian Bosma of what's known as the Hassert Rule, which says that the speaker, and in this case, Hassert was the Speaker of the U.S. House, but the rule generally, this keeps flipping back and forth, I'm sorry, that the speaker will not schedule a floor vote on any bill that does not have majority support within his or her party, even if the majority of the members of the House would vote to pass it. And that's what killed us last year on our homeowner association solar bill. When to talk to your state legislators? The General Assembly is generally not in session on Fridays, and they usually go home. So as of Thursday afternoon, they're heading back. There are also Indiana Third House meetings to provide a forum for community members to discuss pending legislation. This is an excellent opportunity without having to travel to the State House. And the Civil Liberties Union in Indiana is compiling that data and information, and I strongly urge that you go and look at that. How to schedule a meeting with your state legislators. My recommendation is you email both your state legislator and their legislative assistant. Their LAs are listed on the General Assembly website. That just happens to be one of the 4 links to where you can find that information. And then I would follow up with a phone call to their legislative assistant. Share with them that you are a constituent and what issues you want to discuss. That will be very important in terms of them trying to get you an appointment. And that could be an appointment both at the State House as well as back in the district. So how to frame issues for conservatives and Republicans. I threw a couple slides in because I just received this information very recently. And the majority of the legislators that we may be talking to fit into that category. So here are some of the recent results. An overwhelming majority of voters, Republican voters, support market forces instead of mandates. They favor electricity, choice, and competition options, and they want their state to be a national leader in clean energy development. And again, this survey was focused on voters, not necessarily the elected officials, but I think it's most appropriate. Republican voters remain opposed to the idea that humans are causing climate change. I know you probably will not like to hear that, but it's best if you're meeting with a Republican legislator to stay away from the issue of climate change. Voters see an important, limited role for government on clean energy issues, and that role centers on supporting innovation and development of technology. There is some additional data here. There's, interestingly enough, there's more support for solar than there is for wind. There's also strong support to protect property rights to produce energy on your own property or your own land. So farmers and other people who are being approached about wind farms and solar farms, there's very strong support to allow those people to participate in those projects, irrespective of a lot of opposition. Now, during the last session of the General Assembly, the 21st Century Energy Task Force was formed, and I'm going to indicate that there have been some problems so far with this task force. They have refused to address climate change. They're not addressing energy distribution issues such as net metering, and there has been a preponderance of pro-coal testimony. So who are some of the people who are on this task force? Well, here are the legislative members. The two co-chairs are Representative Ed Soliday from Valparaiso and Senator Eric Cook of Bedford. And then the other members are listed here. If your legislator is one of those, I would specifically talk with them about the continuing activities of the task force, because the task force is going to continue to meet through 2020 and prepare a report by December 1st, 2020, after the election. So here are the lay members of the Energy Task Force. You might want to look at this. There are some academics or people that you may or may not know. If you know them, I would encourage you to contact them and to engage in a conversation with them. So how does a bill become a law? Zach, do you want to talk about this? Zach?
Sure, sorry, I had to unmute myself. So basically, you know, we are all familiar with bills that pass and the governor signs them, becomes law, but the steps that it takes to go from an idea to a bill to a law are often kind of lost in the shuffle. So there are several steps that we've tried to simplify and lay them out here. First, it has to be introduced in one of the two houses, either the House or the Senate. And that, whichever house it's introduced in, that is the originating house. Once it is introduced into the House, the originating house, it then must be assigned to a committee. And this is not guaranteed. Once it's assigned to a committee, which that's called first reading, and Laura will talk a little bit more about this later, that committee can then, must, in order for it to advance, must hold a public hearing and then ultimately vote on that bill. So all of those are different potential chokeholds or points where a bill may not advance if it doesn't have a hearing or if during those hearings it doesn't reach a consensus on the committee where the committee votes to advance the bill. So those are all important points to follow as a bill is advancing through the originating house. Once the bill passes out of committee, assuming that it's able to pass out of committee, it then goes to the full body of that originating house for a vote. And again, this is where the Hassert rule that Laura mentioned earlier can come into play. So assuming then it passes the full body of the originating house of a vote, then it has to go back to the other house and go through the exact same process. So say it starts in the House, it then passes out of the House, it goes to the Senate, it must be assigned to a Senate committee. That committee must hold public hearings and vote, and then the Senate must vote on that bill as well. The next part can be tricky too. So if two different versions of a bill pass out of the House and the Senate, then those versions must be reconciled through what's called a conference committee. And only if that conference committee is able to reach an agreement and that agreed upon version can pass both houses, then that bill will go to the governor, who can either then sign the bill or veto the bill, which the legislature can override, or the bill can become law unsigned. So it's a tricky process with a lot of steps, but there are a lot of important points for us as advocates to be following, so that we know when it's most important for us to contact our champions and when bills must move forward. So the next slide here shows the important deadlines which play into the steps that I just outlined. So we've already passed the first deadline here, which is the bill draft request deadline. So that happened on December 10th. So that means all bills that are going to be drafted this year have already been requested. January 6th, on Monday, is when the General Assembly will convene for this year. I guess we don't have an important deadline here, but an important date is obviously January 7th, when we'll be at the State House on the second day of the General Assembly for Renewable Energy Day. All bills must be filed by January 9th, so that's coming up quickly as well. But then basically that first kind of cliff I talked about of bills passing out of the originating house, that has to happen by the beginning of February. So coming up really quickly, we need to see all of those first steps, a bill getting introduced, assigned to a committee, the committee holding hearings and voting, and the full body voting to pass a bill must happen on February 3rd or February 4th, depending on the House. And then March 3rd is in the final passage deadline from the second House. So basically, if a bill passes out of the originating House, it must go through all those steps again by March 3rd in the second House. And then we anticipate the session to adjourn by March 11th. So all activity has to be complete by March 11th or it's not happening this year.
So one of the things that is a little frustrating is that after bills are introduced, then the Speaker of the House or the Senate Pro Tem assigns the bill to a committee. This is referred to as first reading. What you need to understand is that bills are not available until after first reading. So when a legislator files a bill in the clerk's office, they have to wait for either the Speaker or the Senate Pro Tem to assign it to committee before it appears on the General Assembly website. When I checked this morning, there are only about 4 or 5 House bills that have shown up on the General Assembly website. The Senate, there are many, many more bills that have been assigned to committee. There are also things that are called vehicle bills, which are placeholders. They have bill numbers, they have general subject matters or in terms of what title they might amend, but these are bills that have no content that will be used by the state legislative leadership for example, the governor's legislative proposals or for whatever else they choose. So what it is important to understand is that committee chairs have the absolute power and authority to both schedule the bills for committee hearings and to allow or not allow bills to be voted on in the committee so that the bills can move to the entire floor for second and third reading. So they are very strong gatekeepers, and there really isn't a way to change or overcome that. One of the few bills that we do know about is the one that Senator Linda Rogers has introduced, and it is now showing up. It's an HOA solar bill that's been assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee. We're not terribly pleased with the way that bill has been written, but it is very likely that it'll move quickly. Representative Mike Speedy is also working on a draft bill. He has been in consultation with us, and so I expect his bill would be more favorable to our interests. Now, the Senate Judiciary Committee, here are the members of the committee. What's important to understand is that Senator Cook, 3 times previously that our HOA solar legislation has been introduced, he has voted against it each and every time. So we are a little concerned about what the hearing in Senate Judiciary may be like. But those are the members. Red are the legislators, the Republican legislators. The other committee that we generally follow very carefully, I'm not kidding, is Senate Utilities, and though they're the members. If your legislator is a member of either Senate Utilities or the Indiana House Utilities Committee, your legislators are extra special and extra important because they will have an opportunity to hear the debate on the legislation and potentially even offer amendments in committee. Now, we're not expecting a lot of renewable energy legislation to advance this session for a variety of reasons. However, we are expecting the coal industry to have a very serious game plan. We know they have been hiring lobbyists, and it is very likely they're going to propose state legislation and or proposed amendments to protect the Indiana coal industry and coal-fired power plants. The coal industry is unhappy about the investor-owned utilities and integrated resource plans and the recent renewable energy RFPs. Lots of speculation, lots of rumors, but nothing definitive. We just need your legislators to be vigilant. So one of the things that's been of great interest to people has been net metering and what the status of net metering is. There is an interim report, and the next 4 slides come from that report. This information is also available on the IURC website. We're not going to dwell on these numbers except to show or indicate that on this slide, the utilities, the investor-owned electric utilities, are required to offer net metering up until 1.5% of their summer peak load. So, I don't know why this keeps advancing. So the column to be looking at is the third one, percent of the available non-reserved net metering capacity that has been consumed. And you will see that NIPSCO and Vectren, and then next Duke Energy, they are fast approaching an interim cap, so to speak, which they may exceed. So then the rest of this is just additional data that may be of interest to you to see the status of net metering for your utility. So I'm going to pretty much conclude, and then we'll try to go to questions and address other concerns that you might have.
All right, thanks, Laura. I see the first question that we got in from Sam Carpenter is asking for a little bit more of an explanation of the HOA solar access bill or bills that we're anticipating in the 2020 General Assembly session. And maybe a little bit of the background on the previous year's efforts would be helpful as well.
Okay, we did, we've had bills the last 3 years. Some of them have turned out to be somewhat complex. But we had a meeting with 3 of the legislators who are home builders, and the opposition to the HOA solar bill has been coming from primarily the Indiana Home Builders Association. The bill that Linda Rogers has introduced codifies to a certain extent a mechanism where in most cases in the covenants of the homeowners association, it indicates what percentage of the homeowners it takes to modify those covenants. And it can be anywhere from 51 to 75%. So 75% is a pretty steep threshold. But essentially it says whatever that percentage is, if the homeowner can get signatures to support their installation, they can override essentially the HOA board. However, this would be done on a case-by-case basis. And if you got the number of signatures to allow you to override the board and install solar, why not just amend the covenants rather than just doing this on a case-by-case basis? So we're not really sure that this really moves the ball forward too much. Now, it is also possible that we can amend the legislation and that there will be some other things that we expect to be included in Representative Speedy's legislation. I'd be happy, that's a complicated subject, I'd be happy to discuss this further offline.
And I will add that we will have available at Renewable Energy Day kind of a fact sheet that has some helpful talking points and just different ways to discuss the issue as well. But obviously, if anybody on the line has personal experience working with HOAs, that's often the best way to make your case is to frame your passion on the issue with your personal experience.
And we'd like documentation of that. In many cases, there's not an explicit opposition to solar in the covenants themselves. That authority is delegated to an architectural review committee, and in many cases, it's very subjective. And as a result, there continues to be many, many problems. There are some other interim solutions that have been tried. For example, Joey Miles did get permission to change the location of his solar panels by installing something called a solar skin. And we'd be happy to put people in touch with Joey to learn more about that. Some additional questions.
Yeah, so I see 2 more questions. We'll come to one from Travis Murphy here in a second. But first from Julia, we have a question about our meetings with legislators on January 7th being scheduled for us. So we have been working to schedule as many meetings as possible, but we haven't been able to connect with all of the legislators. So if you haven't heard from Shannon Anderson, who has primarily been leading that effort, that means there probably hasn't been a meeting scheduled with your legislator yet. If you are willing to reach out to your legislator to schedule it, I think that would be great, and feel free to let us know. We will continue to work to try to schedule meetings, but it's also possible that we'll be able to get meetings kind of on the sidelines of the State House on January 7th. So even if you don't have a meeting scheduled ahead of time, it is possible that you'll be able to meet with your legislator or staff during the event on January 7th.
We believe that one of the key differences of our Renewable Energy Day this year is the fact that we will be serving food, and the smell of food in the State House attracts people. Okay, so we know that there will be people coming down to see what's going on with the tabling. In most cases, we have asked people to indicate their home addresses so we can schedule meetings with their state legislators. If you are not from the state of Indiana, but you are still interested in meeting, we're sure that you can then join another group that is already scheduled and talk about the business interest of solar and renewable energy.
And Julie asked a quick follow-up. Is the goal to meet with reps and senators both? And I would say yes, the goal is to meet with as
Yes.
many of your representatives, your elected legislative officials as possible. Mike asks, what are the respective chamber calendars on the 7th?
Both the House and the Senate are scheduled to go into session at 1:30. At 2:30, both houses are scheduled for what I thought was kind of a mandatory training program for ethics and for sexual harassment. And I'm told that that may go until almost 4 o'clock. So you do need to be trying to meet with your legislators before 2:30. When they go in at 1:30, we're expecting it to be very quick. They won't have a whole lot of business to do, so they'll go in and then pretty much adjourn. They may hand down some bill lists and things like that, but it won't be very long. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And I think it's also good to just kind of outline our plans for the day on January 7th. So we advocates and industry representatives will set up tables to help educate folks about renewable energy starting at 9 o'clock. And we'll have those open throughout the day. And hopefully people will be able to have scheduled or unscheduled meetings with legislators before they go into session, as Laura mentioned. We'll be having lunch, I think, starting at 11:30, and then we will have a press conference that I believe starts at noon, if I'm remembering it correctly.
I thought it was 12:30.
I'm sorry, you're right. At 12:30 is when we will have a press conference right before they go into session.
So just so people understand, last year we did not have the optimal location for our event. This year we are in the optimal place. We are in what's referred to as the North Atrium. The north side of the building is where, and north of the state capitol is the parking lot for the state legislators. This is how they enter the building. So as they enter on the north side of the building, to get to the elevators, they're going to have to walk right past our tables, okay? Or if they choose to, to skirt us, they could, walk up the stairs. But they will be entering the building from that side, and that should give us a really good opportunity. There will be people such as myself and others who will help to identify who those people are when they come in. And so people who are there and poised or at a table will say, there goes such and such a senator from such and such a location. Do you want to try to catch them for like 2 or 3 minutes just to say what you're doing today?
Great. All right, I want to get back to a question from Travis Murphy. He says, can you describe what you mean by clear authority as it pertains to third-party PPAs?
Well, so far, we believe that either we need to have state legislation that clearly authorizes third-party PPAs, or we'll need to have a court case in front of initiated in front of the commission to establish the right for a company to offer a contract with a retail customer to provide solar or renewable energy. We think that there should be that authority, but so far we know that as soon as somebody tries to do it, the utilities certainly previously expressed they've not been happy about that. And they've told, over the last couple of years, they've told people, no, you can't do that. So there may be situations where that is happening and people just don't know about it. And if there are, good luck. But if the utility finds out you're doing it and they don't like it, they can probably disconnect your service. And Travis, I'm happy to discuss that further. We've had legal memos prepared by groups like the Environmental Law and Policy Center to discuss this. What we really need is a solid test case, or we need legislation, which there was legislation introduced in the 2017 session, which never moved. And we've had other state legislators express an interest in introducing legislation to clarify that, but so far we're not seeing an open door to do that.
All right, thank you, Laura. Got a bunch of new questions coming in. I'm going to answer a few quick hitters here. Sam Carpenter asks, is there something for us to do if we don't have a meeting scheduled with our reps? Should we still show up? The answer is yes. Even if you don't have a meeting scheduled ahead of time, hopefully we'll be able to connect you with your representatives or staff during the day. And it's also a good opportunity just to connect with more folks from renewable energy supporters from around the state. So yes, please do come and show up, and hopefully we'll be able to get you a meeting even if you don't have one set up ahead of time. Larry Rain is asking if we have a recommended dress code for next Tuesday. So, I think that you're going to see a lot of ties and suits in the State House. So really, I think you should dress, be comfortable, but be prepared to be in business or business casual attire.
Shirt and tie is pretty much the required uniform for legislators on the floor.
Yeah.
So on days that are just committee days, they may be a little bit more dressed a little more casually, but the men will have a suit and tie on.
Yeah.
Or sports jacket and khakis or whatever.
Yeah, I will be wearing a jacket and tie. Mike is asking, are we staging outside the State House before going to the State House this year? The answer is no, we're not. Basically, our plan is we will have, so right now, I guess we have an exciting update. So we have about 200 RSVPs for the event, which is great. So we will have a registration table set up. So when you come in, you can kind of check in, let us know that you're there. And basically we'll be, as we get kind of critical mass of groups, everybody who comes will get a welcome packet with some of the handouts, with fact sheets and stuff, as I mentioned. And we'll kind of break up into small groups to prepare for the meetings and talk about the day more informally than we did last year. And Larry is asking if name tags are available or not required. I think we'll have some name tags, but they're not required. But we won't have anything printed. So we'll have, markers and stuff that you can update. And that will be helpful for identifying who your representatives are, and helping to make sure that we're able to get groups together to go meet with legislators as a group. Okay, we had another question from Adam asking, I both work in the solar industry and have personal views on solar in the state. Is it better to frame these conversations as a citizen or an industry member with expertise? Laura, I'll kick that to you for your perspective.
Well, I suppose it depends on, what you see or perceive as the differences between your business interests and your own personal interests. I obviously they're both are extremely important. If you are a constituent and you're trying to go solar and you see that there are barriers that you believe to letting you go solar, obviously those are things you want to discuss with your legislators. But in general, the overall support for the industry, I think is important as well as an economic development matter. So I'd be happy to discuss that further offline to help you figure out how you might frame these things.
Yeah, and Adam, what I would add, I think both is kind of the answer there. I think you want to be, you don't want to seem like you're hiding the ball by not disclosing that you work in the solar industry. But I think, as Laura mentioned, it really depends on what you're interested in discussing. But I think that you should be able to frame your interests as both a solar industry professional and as a citizen who's here interested in specific policies. Another question from Larry. First of all, he says, I just received approval for solar in Geist. Congratulations, Larry. So his question is, are there opportunities related to federal initiatives of interest to Indiana legislators, as in community solar and DOE Solar Technology Office in particular?
The big focus towards the end of the year and towards the end of the congressional session was the failure to extend the investment tax credit for solar. So starting, well, now, the investment tax credit for solar steps down to 26% from 30%. I'm not so sure that there are federal issues that we're really targeting at this point. Our state legislators have enough on their plate just to figure out what's going on in Indiana, no less dealing with the federal government and the U.S. Congress. So I would probably try to stick to state issues.
Let's see, Mike is asking about where the registration table will be located. That's a good question. I don't know our planned layout. I will say that we'll have, big signs and stuff, so it should be pretty easy to find.
Again, we'll be in the north atrium. Essentially, we will be on what is referred to as the second floor. The first floor of the building is essentially what you and I would refer to as the basement. You have to enter the building either from the east doors off of Capitol or through the west doors. And from those entrances, you will have to go through metal detectors. So if you're coming from a job site, you want to, ditch any of the tools or knives or things like that you won't be able to bring into the building. There is also a lobby day with the Indiana State Teachers Association, so it's not clear how many people will be in the building on Tuesday, but there could be a lot of people.
All right, and we have two related questions. Sam asks, do we have numbers related to the number of jobs created supported through renewable energy in Indiana? And Travis asks, will you have data sheets on the value of solar industry in Indiana currently, particularly as it compares to the coal industry? So yes, we will have fact sheets about the value of renewable energy as far as economic development and jobs. I don't know that we're going to be specifically making the case in comparison with coal, but I also haven't seen the finished version of those fact sheets yet. And to answer Sam's question, I think the number is about 10,000 jobs considered renewable energy jobs in Indiana right now, with about a little more than 3,100 of those being solar industry jobs. That's the numbers I have off the top of my head. I'm not sure, Laura, if you have any other.
Yeah, I mean, those are all, important things. And if any of the business people, want to present that kind of specific information that's available from the Solar Energy Industries Association and the Solar Foundation, I would encourage you to do that. I'm not sure that's always the best information for a particular homeowner to be presenting. You know, I think, but, you know, obviously it's very important. Different people have different interests in why they're promoting the solar and renewable energy.
Yeah, but so we will definitely have, excuse me, we will have general renewable energy information fact sheets that will include information about economic development and jobs, among other things.
One of the things that's supposed to be in the packets is there should be like an index card for once you have met with the legislator, for you to write down what they asked you, what kinds of information are they interested in, and for you to return that to us so that we can follow up with them. I think it's most important for us to listen to them, and if you have not met your state legislator before, to develop a relationship with them in some of some sort. If you have an ongoing relationship, then the whole situation is a lot different. Then it's just following up and providing additional information to them. Most of the time, most of the legislators will want this information electronically. So if you hand them a piece of paper, they may say, well, that's nice, but send it to me electronically, so they can then share it with staff. So they get a lot of paper, and if they're not on the utility committees, they won't have an opportunity to deal with these any energy and utility legislation until further into the session. And 2 weeks is a long time for a legislator. More questions?
I think that's everything that I've seen in the webinar chat, unless I missed anybody, in which case I apologize.
We hope this is helpful. It's
here we did get one more question.
okay.
Larry asked, from a homeowner's perspective, I pitched it as positive and valuable investment for me in my home. It would seem that legislators would want to empower such investment.
Yeah, I mean, certainly choice, having more choices, being able to stabilize your energy costs over time. These are to allow you to stay in your home, and this is obviously particularly important to older homeowners such as myself, for trying to decide, well, how long can I afford to be in my home with electric costs continuing to rise. I think the most important thing to do is to listen to what they have to say. I will say this, I know some of us would like to go into a long discussion about net metering and how we need to reverse it. I just would encourage you to determine whether or not your legislator was even serving in 2017 when that legislation was passed, because it's if they were not, if they're a new legislator, they won't know a lot about some of these issues that have come up in the past couple of years. And that will require a different kind of a conversation and follow-up.
Yeah, I think that point of education is really an important one. And we did get another question from Travis that I think fits in with that, which he asked, would it be valuable to discuss with our legislator the importance of separating net metering from interconnection? Which I think is definitely a little bit more technical than a lot of legislators would probably be prepared for. So I think, Laura, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, Travis. To connect to the grid, you have to have an interconnection agreement with the utility, whether you are net metering or not, whether you're net metering or whether or not you're going to build a system as a QF and do something under PURPA. But that both, I mean, there are some other regulatory kinds of issues. We certainly believe that there's a need to update and improve the interconnection rules. I don't expect that the General Assembly is going to do that. That's something that I believe is within the purview of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. It has been discussed previously with them. They have not reviewed and updated those interconnection rules in quite some time, and I would encourage us to, that would be a regulatory campaign. Unless you had another specific question, Travis, I'm not quite sure what else.
Travis says some rule language opens utilities up to limit interconnection if there is no net metering. So with regard to SCA 309, I think.
So I'm not, first of all, when we're talking about net metering and the legislation that was enacted, that only applies to the 5 investor-owned electric utilities. There's an entirely different process if it's a municipal utility versus if it's a rural co-op. The rural co-ops, their individual co-op boards have the ability to change and enact net metering policies, and they're all over the place. So, but the interconnection rule is the same whether you are net metering or not, as I understand it. So if you're net metering or if you want to be a QF under PURPA, the interconnection rule that's in the Indiana Administrative Code, I believe, is the same.
And I think the last question we have time for comes from Mike Mullet. He says he has 2 things. One, he says the director of ORA was on IPM promoting how effectively the state of Indiana was utilizing federal rural solar incentives. Do you have any ideas why?
Or who was saying this?
The director of ORA.
Oh, the Office of Rural something or other?
I think.
I don't know what they meant by that, except that there have been recent announcements about the REAP funds. The REAP funds.
Yeah, that's the only thing that I am aware of.
Yeah, that's the only thing that I'm aware of. And we've had the REAP grants are not just for solar, but a very large percentage of them these days are for solar projects. They usually include other kinds of energy conservation or energy efficiency programs. Mm-hmm.
And Kerwin is suggesting that maybe this was meant to be OCRA, the Office of Community and Rural Affairs.
Yeah, right.
And so the one other question is that we are seeing negative local reactions to solar as well as wind farms. For instance, in Madison County, around Anderson, are there any thoughts or recommendations on playing defense? I think is a good one to end on.
Well, there has been speculation that there could be some sort of legislation that somebody might propose. Right now, the authority is strictly on a county-by-county basis. So those planning commissions and BZAs and commissioners pretty much have a free hand to determine what they do or don't want to do. There have been some people who have suggested that that is not the best for development of these kinds of projects, but I'm not sure there will be an appetite to have legislation along those lines. There could be something that pops up. There has been in the past. It may or may not move.
Okay.
For example, Posey County just had a ordinance that apparently last night was defeated in Posey County on a vote of 5-0. So it just requires local organizing if they're going to be restrictive local ordinances.
All right, well, I know we've hit the top of the hour. Thank you again for everyone for joining us today. Again, a recording of this webinar will be available to everybody who RSVP'd for Renewable Energy Day. We will send that out via email once it's available. And we will also have a PDF of the slides. We hope to see everybody on January 7th, on Tuesday, at the State House, so we can show the broad support for renewable energy in the state of Indiana. And please continue to spread the word. Share, there's a Facebook event or the Eventbrite page. Try to get as many folks as possible to come join us on January 7th. Laura, do you have any other closing thoughts or comments?
Nope. Hope to see everybody next week.
All right. See you all next week. Thank you.